Okay, we're going to try some eggs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack up a dozen of these. Now these are fresh eggs. My son has chickens, all kinds of varieties. There's some brown ones here, and then some green ones, and some tan ones, and you don't have any white ones in this group, but there's a whole bunch of here. So what I'll do is I'll take a dozen of them, crack them up, whip them up into here, and then we'll see how much that puts on a tray. So I'm going to look at maybe a dozen eggs per tray. We'll see how that fills up. That should be okay. And let me get cracking on these. And all we're going to do is just take one of these eggs and crack them on the side. And then break them into the pan. And once they're in there, then we'll just whip them all up. So what I'll do is I'll pause this and come back when I get the dozen eggs in here. And then we'll go from there. All right, we have our dozen eggs in here. So I'm going to take the little whisk and whisk this up. I could use the blender or something, but yeah, just more to clean up. So I'm just going to whisk these up, and then we'll see how they fit into the tray. Getting where they're mixed. Now, one thing when you're cracking eggs that are raised on, on the farm instead of a store, the shells are a little bit harder, so you have to hit them a little bit harder, and sometimes they're so stiff that they'll actually kind of break in pieces. So I had a couple times, had a piece in there going in, fished out. So now this is all mixed up. That's ready to go. Now remember, when you freeze dry raw eggs, you're going to need to cook them once you rehydrate them. These will be made into a powder. And then the powder, the formula for that is 2 tablespoons powder to 2 tablespoons water is 1 egg, equivalent to 1 egg. Now, if you look at the egg shells here, some are bigger, some are smaller, but that's kind of all average out. So let me get one of the trays out, and we'll see how much the dozen eggs filled up the tray. Well, I'm back with the tray. This is that dozen eggs that we beat up a little bit. We'll see how far it fills the tray up. See if we want to go a little bit more than a dozen eggs. Well, that's kind of low on there, so we could go more, but I think I'll just try this. We'll do a couple trays of these. I have the 3 dozen here that I was going to do, so I'll probably put this in the freeze dryer and do another like this, and I'll look at maybe put a little bit more in there. And then I'll fill up one of the other trays with something else. I have some tomatoes that I've got juice that I need to do as well, so I may stick those in here as well. Let's go from there, and I'll come back once I get the other trays all loaded up. All right, we got our 3 dozen, a dozen each egg, and dozen eggs in each tray, and then over here I have some tomato juice that I had left over that wasn't a full batch of them. So I have I canned some in some reusable lids, and one didn't seal, so that's this one here. I have time on the other ones to do those, so I'll put these in the freeze dryer. And it should be about ready. You gotta let it cool for 15 minutes. It should be about there, so I'll go ahead and load these in. Now, if I was going to put them any fuller, I'd need to probably fill them when they're in the freeze dryer, but they're only about, not even halfway up. So I'm just going to do a dozen eggs into one, so I know how much is in there, and then I can kind of mark on the bag that that's a dozen eggs worth or whatever it is when I powder them up. And I'll powder them the same way I did the tomato powder in the food processor, or I may even use the blender on it. We'll have to see. Probably the food processor. From what I'm understanding on those that I've seen do this, the finer you get this egg powder, the better it's going to rehydrate for you and work. It'll be a little quicker. If it's a little bit bigger chunks, it takes longer for it to rehydrate. So let me get them loaded in the freeze dryer, and we'll come back once it's loaded, and we'll go from there. All right, I have them loaded. It was kind of a challenge walking with these full trays to can't keep them balanced. I think if I do these again, I'll go ahead and put the trays in and put them in. I think a dozen eggs in each tray worked out pretty good. And so I got the 3 trays of eggs and 1 tray of tomato. And we're gonna set this off and get it going. We're gonna hit the continue. It's been cooling plenty long enough. And we're freezing. So we'll come back once they're dried, and we'll continue with the freeze drying of the eggs to make powder. Well, our eggs are done. You can see it looks like they separated in there. It took 42 hours to dry them. And we're gonna go ahead and close this. I hit the wrong button here. It's okay. We're gonna shut the motor off, and you can see, look like they separated, and you can see on the Mylar they're actually going to come off, I think, really good. So what we'll do is we're going to take and try the food processor and see how fine that makes it, because I think the finer you make the powder, the quicker it'll rehydrate. So we'll try that. If it don't do fine enough powder, I might try in the blender, see how that does. Otherwise, I have a colander flour sifter that we can send it through to do that. So we'll try, see which way breaks back up into the finest powder. So let me get ready for that, and we'll come back once I get that ready to go. Now here's something, as I have to pull the tray out, it looks like it kind of shrunk up a little bit. First time I've done eggs, so let's check the other trays. And yeah, looks like they've shrunk a little bit. And yeah, the same thing for that tray. That was kind of interesting. But you know, the tomatoes, we've done many of those, and those don't shrink up. So let me go ahead and pull this out, and we'll go over and we'll send this through the blender, and we'll see what this one does. All right, here's what it looks like after we send the first tray through the blender. It has a little bit more of a little bit bigger flake. So I think I'm going to try sending it through the powder sifter or flour sifter and see if we can get in a little bit finer yet. So let me come back when I get that through the sifter, and we'll show you what that looks like. Okay, send it through the flour sifter, and this is what it turned out like. I had a little bit at the end that didn't go through quite so well, and that's where that come from there. So I don't see a whole lot of difference, but a little bit different in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to package this in probably the shrink wrap first, and we'll see how that goes. Well, in the vacuum sealer, it seemed to work pretty good. I know on the tomato powder, because it's real fine, it wants to suck it up into here as it's vacuuming. On the onion or the eggs here, it didn't do that. So that's going to be a good way to do that. We'll store some of this. So let me get the next one. I think I'm going to process it the same way and see how that works. Or I might, you know what, I think I'll try the blender and see if it does a little bit finer job. I tried the blender, but it only blended, you know, maybe about this much on the bottom because it's liquid. It just didn't work so well. So I went back to the food processor, and one tray with a dozen eggs kind of overfilled this jar. I put it in another pan so I wouldn't, you know, wouldn't spill it. So it overfilled it so it wouldn't fit in here. So you'll be able to get probably, you know, you've got a dozen eggs in there plus maybe another 10 more. So you can get, you know, good 20 eggs in a quart jar. So that's quite a bit of savings in space. So I'm going to take the last tray. I'm going to put it in one of these Mylar bags, and that'll be our real long-term storage. So let me get that one processed up and in the bag, and we'll come back once that's ready. Here's what we ended up with. We have a dozen eggs in here. This is also a dozen eggs, and this is another dozen eggs. So this here would be our medium storage, or long-term storage, and we'll try some of this here in a little bit. We'll mix them up and see how they taste. We may take a fresh egg and see how they taste compared to that, but we'll fix some of this up so we can see what it's like. And then now I still have the tomatoes to process. So I'm going to clean out the food processor, make sure there's no residue of the eggs in there, and then we'll process these up and package those as well. All right, I took 4 tablespoons out and put in here. We're going to mix up 2 scrambled eggs, and that allowed me to put what was the rest in that quart jar. So one of these pint jars will hold 10 eggs. So that's kind of something to remember, is I can get 10 eggs in a pint jar, so that's a good way to count it. So what we'll do here in a little bit is we'll go ahead and fix these scrambled eggs up and see what they're like. All right, here's our 2 eggs, which is 4 tablespoons. This is the powder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add in 4 tablespoons of water into this, and then we'll let it sit for a while and see how it turns out, and we'll start making some scrambled eggs out of it. All right, I have the 4 tablespoons of water in there, and I put them in a jar, and I did vacuum seal it just so I can shake it up here, and I'm going to let it sit in the refrigerator for a little while and see what it turns out like, and we'll come back once I let it sit for a while. Well, here's what it looks like after being in the water in the refrigerator for a while. So let me you can see there's, just like in a regular egg. So I'll stir this up for a little bit, make sure it's all incorporated, then we'll get the skillet hot and then try scrambling them. You know, when you pull the fork out, kind of looks like what eggs do when they're freshly cracked and mixed. So we'll get the skillet all ready, and we'll start cooking them here in just a couple seconds. All right, we have the skillet hot. I put just a little bit of butter in there, and now we're going to pour the eggs in. Now that's 4 tablespoons of powder and 4 tablespoons of water. And well, it looks like it's not doing too bad in making an omelet. Looks like it's cooking just like a regular egg. I'm going to see if I can turn this over and we'll just make an omelet out of it. There, we have it turned over. And it looks like it's doing really well there. Wasn't kind of what I was planning, but it just kind of rolled out there, and I think it works pretty good. So let me finish cooking this, and then we'll give a little taste test. Well, we have it in the plate. I'm going to cut off a little piece of it and give it a taste. It's just cooked in butter with no salt, no nothing on it. I think it tastes just like it did if it was made with fresh. So I think this is going to be a hit. We'll be able to have eggs anytime we want, whether we have them in the store or not. Or if my son has plenty of eggs, we'll do so many more of these. It's actually pretty good this way. So they worked out really good. Made an omelet. It stuck together really nice. So you make an omelet, or you can do scrambled, and however much you want. I have them in the Mylar bags. It was 12. And then in the canning jar in the pint, that was, this one is 10 eggs. So that's would be 20 tablespoons of powder. So if I wanted to reconstitute this, I'd put in 20 tablespoons of water, or any other liquids you could use. And then I'd have 10 eggs if I was doing like for a big group where I needed a lot of eggs. But you can pull out however much you want. The Mylar bags have a dozen in them, and the shrink wrap has a dozen in them. So you can always seal those back up. As you use them, you can just kind of seal the vacuum bags, especially. Those are really easy. Just vacuum them closed. The Mylar bags, once you open them up, you take out the oxygen absorber, and then you have to put a new one in if you're going to seal them back up. But you could always put them in a jar and close them up and keep them that way. Well, here's how I made the omelet. I put some cheese in there, some ham, and some sauteed peppers, red peppers. I think there's yellow peppers and some onions in there. And I'm going to have that as an omelet. That's how I'm going to finish the rest of it. And that is going to be a good meal to have. I haven't freeze-dried any of the ham or the cheese yet, but that'll be kind of next step. And then you have the meals ready. You can pull out whatever you want, and mix them up. I may even kind of mix them all in together so I have like a serving.